I'm really pleased to be able to introduce the Dmitri Alperovitch, the CTO and co-founder of CrowdStrike. He's a renowned computer security researcher. He's been a thought leader in the industry on cybersecurity policies and statecraft. When I've mentioned to my colleagues that we're fortunate to have him speaking, a lot of people remember him from McAfee, where he was Vice President of Threat Research at McAfee, was a great speaker with that company as well. In 2010 and 11, he led the global team that investigated and brought to light Operation Aurora, Night Dragon, Shady Rat, the groundbreaking cyber espionage intrusions, and he actually also named those incidences. So please welcome Dmitri to the stage.
Thank you very much. Great honor to be here with you. Thank you, Checkpoint, for bringing us on. We're very pleased to be a partner with Checkpoint on providing intelligence services to their platform, their intelligence store. I'm here to talk to you about nation-state threats. So what happens when folks like Inbar go and work for intelligence services of other countries, and what kind of damage they can do. So a little bit about me. I started CrowdStrike a number of years ago after leaving McAfee and really realizing that the industry was fundamentally making a very strategic mistake. At McAfee, I was leading a lot of the investigations into early on nation-state sponsored activity, and I realized that the landscape is really changing. When you're dealing with cybercrime, when you're dealing with threat actors that are opportunistic in nature, don't fundamentally care specifically about a target, don't have the president of their nation calling them up and asking why they haven't gotten into a particular target that's of interest to them, that's of interest to the national security or economic security of their country. We're now dealing with a very different beast, right? Intelligence services with billions of dollars in budget, thousands of people that are coming after you to steal your intellectual property, steal your national security secrets, steal your trade secrets. And that necessitates a very different approach to security. That necessitates the use of intelligence in order to address this threat. And one of the things I realized that as an industry, we're focused on the wrong things. For the last 25 years in security, we've been so focused on the tools that the attackers use. We've been focused on malware. We've been focused on exploits. We've been focused on vulnerabilities, command and control servers, and so forth. And those are just digital crowbars. Those are not the problem. The problem is the adversary. Someone is coming after you for a particular reason, right? Today they use a crowbar, tomorrow they'll use a sledgehammer, the next day they jump off the window. There's numerous ways of getting into your environment, physical or cyber. And what tool they use today is not as important as understanding why they're coming after you, what do they want, what is their tradecraft, how are they going to try to get in. And we keep chasing as an industry these digital crowbars versus focusing on the real problem that we need to deal with. And that was really the impetus for starting CrowdStrike, to focus squarely on the adversary problem and trying to understand their motivations, their capabilities, their intentions, and how to defeat them. So we're at CrowdStrike. We don't have a mission statement. We like to say that we're on a mission. One of our missions is to provide government-level intelligence capabilities. And as I go through this presentation and share with you some of our intelligence, you'll see that we really have incredible capabilities in terms of identifying the various threat actors out there, nation-states, organized criminal groups, activist terrorist groups. And then we're offering them at an unclassified level to commercial organizations that have no other way of collecting that intelligence, to government agencies, even, and intelligence agencies, that may have some of that information at a classified level but can't actually use it because it's classified because of how it was collected. We're giving all of our information, obviously, at an unclassified level because it's collected by us. It's inherently not classified. And that information is actionable. We focus on helping organizations use that to help defend their networks and understand who's attacking them or why, bringing it to the business. What we found out when I was doing all these investigations is that executives at companies fundamentally do not care about the technical details. When you go to brief your CEO board of directors, as we often do when we do intrusion investigations, they couldn't care less about the malware. They don't care what registry keys it modifies, what neat rootkit it has. That's only interesting to the techies. Fundamentally, the executives are interested in what is the impact to my business, what do I need to know, how do I need to respond to this threat. Right? And that comes back to the adversary. That comes back to understanding the threat and understanding what they're trying to achieve in your network. So from an adversary perspective, we track a plethora of adversaries across the world. This is just a small sample that I could fit on the slide here. We actually developed a naming scheme that a lot of folks in the community have started to adapt because it's kind of easy to understand nomenclature when you're dealing with an actor. The problem we've had in this industry for so long is that everyone was creating their own names. They're all random. They made no sense. And we've gotten to have so many names that it created complete confusion. So when we started the company, we started thinking of how do we organize this? How do we make sense of it all? So let's create a naming scheme where each actor is going to have a cryptonym, a two-word cryptonym, and the second word is going to identify the type of actor that this is. And we decided to be a little bit tongue-in-cheek, make a little bit of fun of our adversaries, and picked an animal scheme. So this is our zoo of adversaries. So anything panda-related is going to be a Chinese nation-state operation. Typically, People's Liberation Army, the Chinese military, and we'll cover them in greater detail. Any bear is going to be Russia. Iran, kitten, Persian cat, right? Anyone here ever heard of Kalima? So Kalima is actually the national animal of North Korea, hence why we picked it. If you've never heard of it, don't be too upset. It's actually a mythical flying horse. So I think it tells you a lot about a country. Most countries tend to pick a real animal. You know, here you guys have kangaroos, emus. The North Koreans invent one. So I think it tells you a lot about the leadership of that country. They also have a dead guy as president. So that it tells you a lot about what you're dealing with here. India's tiger. There are other nation states that we're tracking as well. Also, hacktivist terrorist groups, we use a cryptonym of Jackal for them. So, for example, Dead-Eye Jackal is our Syrian Electronic Army, as it's commonly known. And the reason why we use names even for groups that have names, again, is to have a common nomenclature, but also oftentimes these groups change and morph, and we want to track them consistently with a single name, regardless of what they decide to call themselves. And then criminal groups are tracked under SPIDER as well. So for each one of these actors, we track them by, obviously, actor, their geography, their campaign, and the types of victims that they go after. So each group, and primarily this is the case with nation states, but also some of the hacktivist terrorist groups, have particular sectors that they go after because they're getting those mission objectives from someone. So for example, Energetic Bear is a Russian intelligence operation, a cyber espionage operation. They go primarily after energy companies. Russia, of course, energy is over 70% of their GDP. The big state-owned enterprises, Gazprom and Rosneft, are the two big gas and oil companies that are contributing so much to the Russian budget. It is a key interest to Russia to both steal intellectual property, get understanding on M&A deals that are going on, get an upper hand, and the Energetic Bear is one of the key actors that they use from a cyber perspective to conduct espionage. Boulder Bear is an actor that focuses primarily on government, stealing national security secrets, and we've actually seen them here in Australia being very active. Viceroy Tiger is actually an interesting group. They are a commercial organization that is conducting espionage operations, we believe, on behalf of the Indian government and perhaps even others, and they're actually tied to an entity called the Appen team that is a commercial company in India, but they're doing intrusion operations, believed to be doing intrusion operations. And they have a very broad focus. We have seen them also here in Australia going after finance and legal sectors. Oftentimes they're after M&A transactions and other corporate information that is very useful to their clients. Iran has a number of actors. We've actually seen growing capabilities emanating out of Iran. We're watching them very carefully. One of the concerns we have is that in a couple of months here in November is going to be the conclusion of the negotiations with the group of Western nations that are trying to rein back in the Iranian nuclear program. And based on the outcome of those negotiations, if they fall apart, we may very well see not just espionage activity, but disruptive and potentially even destructive activity from Iran. We've seen that before. Their capabilities have improved remarkably in the last 5 or 6 years. And in fact, they, as a nation, are very much focused on cyber. They've actually created a cyber council that includes the president of the country, the head of the IRGC, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard, essentially their elite military force, and the Speaker of Parliament. That's how important cyber is to them, both from an offensive and defensive perspective. I can't think of any other country that raises cyber to that level of importance. For example, in my country, in the United States, I think the president has given 2 speeches total in the course of his 6-year presidency on the topic of cybersecurity. So that tells you how importantly the Iranians treat that issue. And they've rapidly improving their capabilities, becoming a 2nd-tier player behind the United States, Australia, Russia, in terms of being able to orchestrate these types of attacks. China is an interesting beast in of itself. They are the big behemoth. They have lots and lots of groups focused on different aspects of their targeting operations. So you have groups that are focused on dissidents, obviously, anyone that's involved in the Falun Gong movement or Tibetan activities. And then they have lots and lots of groups that are specializing on particular sectors: the financial sector, the technology and communication sectors, industrial engineering, almost any sector you can possibly imagine, agriculture. We have actors that are penetrating those organizations and trying to steal literally everything that's not bolted down. So let's dive into China a little bit. In the last year, we've really had, I think, we've made a lot of progress in shining the light on the Chinese activity and telling the world really what is really going on in China. One of the things that happened that was really positive from my perspective is that the US government has actually come out and issued a criminal indictment against 5 PLA officers that are part of the 2nd Bureau of what's known as 3PLA, 3rd Department of General Staff. We'll get to that in a minute. That were part of a military unit that was orchestrating intrusion activity into literally thousands of organizations over a period of 6 or 7 years. So the US government actually came out and said, this is who the people are. They issued about a 100-page indictment that details the companies that some of the companies that they broke into, what they were stealing, and also talked about the state-owned enterprises in China, the government-owned enterprises that were benefiting from the stolen property. An unprecedented move, and I think was really instrumental in highlighting to the Chinese how seriously we take this issue, and the fact that there will be repercussions. These people can never travel again outside of China to any country that has an extradition treaty with the United States, which is a lot of them. They can never go work for a Western company. The PLA actually doesn't pay a lot of money, so a lot of these folks are no doubt quite a bit upset. And by the way, their friends that have not been named in the indictments are hopefully thinking twice about whether this is a career that they really want to pick. We ourselves at CrowdStrike put out a report 2 months ago outing another unit, separate unit, that was conducting these espionage operations and actually identified an individual that was involved in those operations. The first time, really, that a private sector organization did that, actually came out and named the individual and showed his picture. And then we also showed the building that they were in Shanghai, and I'll get to how we did that a little bit later. But first, let's talk about China and how this country actually conducts these sorts of operations. A little bit of political information for you about the Chinese government, how it's organized. So obviously at the head you have the Politburo that controls all aspects of the Chinese government. Underneath the Politburo you have something called the Central Military Commission. It actually is comprised of a lot of the Politburo members, and they control the military. This is ultimately the controlling organ for the entire People's Liberation Army. And by the way, it's called the People's Liberation Army. It actually includes, as you can see, the Navy and the Air Force. It's sort of the encompassing word for their military. The 2nd Artillery is actually their nuclear forces and ballistic missile capabilities. Underneath the Central Military Commissions, you have all these different forces. You also have something called the General Staff Department. This is essentially the headquarters of the Chinese military that controls combat operations. That's the 1st department of this General Staff Department. They have a military intelligence capability. That's the 2nd department. The 4th department is their electronic warfare. And then the 3rd department is the interesting one to us. This is the one that's known as 3PLA, 3rd Department of General Staff, and they do signals intelligence. So if you think about NSA, if you think about ASD, this is who does that type of work for the Chinese government. And they do that both in the physical sphere as well as in the cyber sphere. How is that department organized? Well, it has a number of research institutes. It also has 12 bureaus. Those bureaus have particular mission tasking. So the 1st bureau, for example, is focused primarily on defense, helping government networks in China better secure themselves against attack. The second bureau is the one that we call Common Panda. They've traditionally had a focus on USA and Canada, both government and commercial entities. This is the bureau where those 5 individuals were in, and that was the one that was indicted by the US government. Fourth bureau is focused on Korea and Japan. You have a bureau that's focused on Russia, and then Taiwan and Southeast Asia. The 8th bureau is an interesting one. They have also an English focus from the targeting perspective, but they don't do much with USA, Canada. They work primarily with Europe, Africa, and we believe also Australia. So if you're seeing intrusions from the PLA into Australia, a lot of them are likely coming from this 8th bureau. 12th bureau is the one that we outed publicly a couple of months ago. That was the one we called Putter Panda. And they focused on satellite signal intelligence. So what that means is that they were actually breaking into companies that were involved in that sector. They were building satellites, satellite communications platforms, space technologies, and they were bringing all that back to China in order to build up their capabilities in that particular sector. So let me tell you the story of how we actually performed attribution of Putter Panda to that 12th bureau. So we were monitoring this group for a number of years. We had a lot of indicators about their activity. We have an incident response arm that performs investigations. We have an intelligence arm that obviously track these groups very, very closely, have massive amounts of malware and domains that we're looking at from this group. And we noticed a strange pattern that 5 years ago, back in 2009, usually these folks pick random kind of whois information when they register their domains. But we noticed a pattern that for a few of those domains, they actually use the same email address over and over again. And we said, well, that looks interesting. And Chen is a Chinese name. We knew this group was affiliated with China. We gave them the code name of Putter Panda. By the way, the reason the first word is Putter, one of our analysts is a guy that doesn't get out much. And this group, oftentimes, when they send out their spearphishing emails, as lures, they send invitations to conferences. And when you open up that agenda or that invitation, they exploit your machine and put their malware on the machine. And this individual sort of associates in his mind any conferences with golfing, so hence the name Putter. But this particular email piqued our attention, and we started looking at anyone named CPY Chan who may have an online persona. And we identified this individual with a pretty robust social networking profile. He had a Picasso photo album. He also had a blogging site. We found out a little bit of information about this individual going back to 2004. He was born in 1979. He said he works for military police. That was an interesting indicator to us. But still, we don't know if he's really the guy that we're looking for. His real name is Chang Ping, makes sense. And he was actually involved with the 711 network security team, which is a hacking team in China. So we know that he's got some connections to hacking activities, clearly a technical individual. His security digest list that he was running was operated at Shanghai Jiaotong University, which we've affiliated with a lot of intrusion operations from China in the past. So he clearly immediately became a very important person of interest to us. As I mentioned, he has a hobby in photography and has a Picasso album site. He's got a bunch of pictures of his girlfriend. And then he had a very interesting picture that piqued our attention. It was a picture of his dormitory. Initially, when we saw it, it was sort of a normal dormitory picture, a lot of rice vodka. But then in the corner there, you can see we blew it up for you, there was a hat. A standard issue PLA hat. This is when we started calling this process of hattribution, right? At this moment, we knew that this individual was very likely a PLA officer, and we knew we were onto something. We started very carefully going over all of his pictures. Now, he didn't have anything that said, I'm working for the PLA, I'm doing intrusions on behalf of the PLA, if only it were that easy. But he had a number of pictures of his office, this building here. We started looking at that building. The first thing that we noticed were these satellite dishes. They're a little bit too big to receive TV signals, right? Pretty massive, actually. We also noticed a key landmark, the Shanghai Pearl Tower. So we know that this individual works in Shanghai, a very important thing for us. We started scouring Shanghai satellite pictures using Google Earth. And lo and behold, we're actually able to find this building. Here's that satellite dish. Here's the tennis courts. It looked very much the same, right? But we weren't certain yet. So we decided we were actually working with New York Times, and they ultimately did a big profile on this group and published our report. So we sent a New York Times photographer. I'm not very popular in China, so it's pretty hard for me to get, well, actually, it would be easy for me to get a visa. It just would be hard to come out. We sent a New York Times photographer there to take a picture of that building, and we knew we had paid dirt when we saw that picture, because it was exactly the same picture. Here's that satellite antenna that we were looking at earlier. We started looking at the address of that building, and that's when we realized that we were really onto something, because the address of that building on this Chinese government site actually mentioned Unit 61486, which we know from open source intelligence actually maps is a designated unit for the 12th Bureau of the 3rd PLA that is involved in satellite communications and space-based signals intelligence collection. And by the way, when we mapped out the victimology for Parapanda, we knew that they were going after this specific sector. So attribution, going from the hat, image analysis, analysis of the domains and social networking infrastructure, we were able to identify the individual who was involved, who we now believe is responsible for the procurement and setup of the command and control infrastructure for the 12th Bureau, Mr. Chang Ping, and the exact building in Shanghai that they're operating in. Now you may ask, why is this important? Not knowing that building, knowing who Chang Ping is, may not necessarily be important to a commercial entity, like many of you. It may be important for the government if it's going to take some action against that individual. But what is important is understanding their mission objectives, right? If you're in the space satellite communications sector, this is one of the adversaries you really need to know and understand well. You need to understand how they operate. You need to understand what information they may want from you, how they would break in, because they're going to come after you, most likely. And that's something that we're providing to our customers through our intelligence. I want to talk to you about another panda that we track. Someone we call numbered panda. It'll become obvious in a second why it's numbered. They have very broad targeting priorities. They target governments, they target financial sector very extensively, telecommunications sector, technology companies, media companies as well. They love to use spear phishing attacks with primarily PDF and Word document exploits. And they've been operating for the last five years, a little bit over 5 years now. Now, the reason they're called numbered is because they actually use a very interesting trick. And sometimes this group is also known as Dime Calc group or Calc team. And the reason is that in their domain, the malware, the domain that's hard-coded in the malware, when they resolve that domain name to an IP address, they don't actually connect to that IP address as most malware would do. It actually takes that IP address and puts it into this formula where it takes the first octet, multiplies it by the second, and adds a third. And that gives you the port number that it's actually going to come out of your network. And that gives them a very flexible capabilities to actually determine what the best egress path out of your organization is. So if port 443, for example, may be blocked outbound from your environment, they can easily try port 80, they can try port 8080 or something else by simply changing the IP address that their domain resolves to, right, without the need to update any malware. And that's a very powerful capability. Now, they've been using this literally for 4 or 5 years, and a lot of people in the security community have been tracking them pretty closely. And then we noticed an interesting change about a year ago. Around actually G20 summit, they were sending out lures for the G20, and the Chinese always have a very keen interest in any G20 events that are happening. They want to find out the agendas and not the agendas, but the policy positions of various countries that are involved. So they love to send these lures, typically PDF documents that contain exploits. And what we noticed that around this time, they started using a new piece of malware that they developed we call it Show News Dropper. And then a secondary rat, 3001 rat. This one is actually pretty popular with a number of pandas. And one notable tactic that we noticed is that malware actually did not use any persistence. Now, this is a common technique that most organizations, most intrusion operations would use because They want to be able to come back into your organization at will. If a machine reboots, they want to make sure that malware restarts upon a reboot. These guys weren't doing that, and they removed the dynamic port calculations, starting changing their tradecraft. This is actually part of a theme that we've been seeing. I'll talk about that a little bit later, where these adversaries are moving away from noisy things that are maintaining persistence on your system. Even use of malware, some of the more advanced actors are shying away from, because they know that malware sticks out like a sore thumb. If you've got an unknown process running in your environment that beacons out to some server, you've got network communications that can be detected, you can have some detection at the host. They prefer not to use malware at all. Now, of course, G20, one of the reasons I picked this adversary is that you've got a G20 coming up in Brisbane in November, and we are going to expect to see quite a bit of activity from Number Panda and some of the other actors in the months leading up to it. So it's important to know Number Panda pretty well. So one of the things we do is really work very hard with organizations to operationalize this intelligence. We don't just put out these reports and talk about who these actors are and what they're after, but actually provide you with actionable intelligence indicators that can be used to detect them on your network and prioritize information when you do get an alert. So the reason for our partnership with Checkpoint is to integrate that information into the Checkpoint platform. And we actually integrate with other technologies as well. So we provide, for example, feeds into SIMs, packet capture devices, IDSs. We have APIs that can be used for real-time access to all this information and use that in visualization tools and other systems, advanced malware detection systems, and so forth. And the way that the information can be used is really in a number of ways. Security operations teams are one of the primary users of our intelligence. They, of course, are consuming all the alerts that are taking place in their environment. They're overlaying our intelligence on top of it through these different mechanisms. And they use it first and foremost for prioritization. So if you know that you're dealing with a target attack, you're probably going to raise the priority level of your response versus some run-of-the-mill malware that one of your users got infected by. Or at least you probably should be. And most organizations deal with malware incidents almost on a daily basis. Everyone has limited resources, limited time, limited people. You want to prioritize and focus on what's most important and dedicate all of your resources to that. So one of the ways you can use our intelligence is to figure out, is this important or not? Is this targeted? If it is, you can start looking at all the information we have on that adversary to determine what to do next, right? How does this actor operate? What information are they likely going after? How do they maintain persistence? How do they move laterally? How do they operate inside your environment so you can understand where to look for them first and foremost and really respond to that incident? And that information is typically consumed by incident response teams that are taking action on these incidents. The intelligence reports themselves are great for user awareness, both on the technical teams to know what type of adversaries you may be dealing with, what their capabilities are, how to re-architect your defenses to meet that threat. They're also great for executives. So we have both very deep technical reporting. We also have strategic reporting that is very helpful for executives to understand the threat, right? Who is Putter Panda? Why are they important to your industry? And that helps also drive budget for you folks. And is also one of the reasons we do attribution pictures is that it makes it very personal for executives. This is the guy, Chang Peng, that you're dealing with, right? He's a threat. I get that as a CEO, as a board member, and they're much more likely to relinquish some of their budget to deal with that threat. One of the areas we've been using that intelligence lately, and some of our customers have as well, is for penetration testing. Sort of adversary-centric penetration testing. Traditional pen tests kind of include scans of the environment, looking for vulnerabilities, and that's all great. But a more realistic pen test is to actually assume the identity, the tradecraft of an attacker that's likely to target you, use their tools, use their technique to actually try to break into your organization and see how far you can get. That presents a much more realistic test of how you're going to deal with a threat that's actually coming at you and how prepared are you. Very, very, very important. One of the things we talk to customers about, though, is the need to move beyond just indicators of compromise. Indicators of compromise are great, and we do a lot of work to track these actors, understand which indicators they may be using. But this is, by its nature, very reactive. If you don't know the indicator, if you have a new actor that's showing up, you may not have that indicator, and you're going to miss that threat. So one of the things we've been really trying to pioneer is this concept of an indicator of attack, where as opposed to looking for the exact tool or the exact technique that the adversary may be using, you're looking for their intentions, right? You're looking for things like credential theft, lateral movement, privilege escalation, exploitation of known programs. How it's being done is irrelevant, right? Which exploits is used, what malware, if there is even malware, which password dumping tool. That can change on a regular basis, but the fact that it's happening is what's really important. And the way you can really do that is by getting endpoint visibility, understanding what's actually happening at your host. The network visibility is fantastic to give you broad perspective of what's going on, so the use of checkpoint devices is absolutely key for that, but you also want to augment it with understanding what is going on at your endpoint, what is executing. And this is particularly important when you're dealing with what I call malware-free intrusion, when the adversaries are not using malware, when they've grabbed credentials from your systems, when they've become domain admin, and they're moving around like a legitimate domain administrator. They're using tools like WMI, PowerShell, scheduled tasks. There's no indicators for you to look for, and that's when the endpoint visibility becomes really key. We actually have a solution that we call Falcon Host that provides you with that detection-based capability, looking for the indicators of attack versus just the indicators of compromise. One of the other things that it does is actually provide you full recording capability. So everything that's executing is being recorded. Think of it as a video camera inside your machine that's looking at every process creation, file system event, network activity, so you can start proactively hunting in your enterprise to understand what programs are running that are connecting to the network, what programs are being launched by browsers, right? What programs are maintaining persistence, who's creating scheduled tasks in my environment, who is trying to dump passwords out of memory. All those sorts of things that are really great to get that real-time forensics view, both for investigative purposes, if you do have an incident that you're trying to track down, or for more proactive hunting within your enterprise to look for the attacker. Attribution is integrated in, so all that intelligence that I talked about that we integrate with other products is obviously integrated onto our platform. And then prevention for the pre, during, post-attack stage to contain the adversary, to stop them from running their programs, and prevent them from being able to achieve exploitation on your systems. One of the great successes we've had with this technology that I want to talk to you about for a few minutes is actually a case that we revealed a few months ago, back in July, where we've been working with some of our customers that are in the think tank business. So a lot of them are in the US, where they're working very closely with government agencies in the United States and providing kind of independent policy advice to policymakers on what's going on in different geographies, different areas of focus. And we had Falcon Host software rolled out to all their desktops, all their servers. And we were detecting an adversary that we called DPanda. We detected them actually back in May, where they were targeting people that you would expect the Chinese to target. Those that are focused on East Asia Pacific, on China, advising US government on the Chinese policy. You would expect that this is of keen interest to them. Then something happened on June 18th. ISIS, now called ISIL, advanced on the Iraqi city of Baiji, which contains one of the massive oil refineries, one of the biggest oil refineries in Iraq, which just so happens to have capability to refine over 300,000 barrels of oil, a lot of it going to China. In fact, Iraq has been steadily growing as one of the most important sources of imports, oil imports for China. June 18th, this happens. June 18th, literally hours later, DPanda shifts its targeting in those think tanks to go after individuals that are working in the Middle East, that are working in Iraq. Why? Because they want to understand what is the US government going to do, what advice the US government is getting from the think tank world about Iraq, about what's taking place there. Are they going to end up, which is what we're doing now, becoming an air force for the Chinese to protect their investments in Iraq, right? So obviously we're doing it for various reasons, but they wanted to know back then, is that going to happen? So lastly, I think intelligence is absolutely fundamental in understanding the motivations of your adversaries, understanding why they're coming after you. And I want to leave you with a quote from Changping, one of our Powder Panda actors. that he had on his blog. He said it's the soldier's duty to defend the country. As long as our country is safe, our military is excellent. Well, I want to tell you that at CrowdStrike, we believe it's our duty to defend you, to provide you the tools and intelligence that's critical to understand who's coming after you and help you defend yourself against those actors. Thank you very much.